So one more time, good morning and welcome to this wonderful event, to the third year of the JCL conference. It is always a huge privilege to be here at this wonderful platform for sharing ideas and experiences. So a big thank you to Shimon for giving us the opportunity, and a big thank you for you for coming and be willing to listening to us. My name is Jakub, this is David. We both work as methodologists here at James Cook. And this morning we'll talk about how we can use students as well as teachers' mistakes to learn. Those of you who know me a little bit might have noticed that I suffer from something called OCD. And the way this reflects into my teaching is that I sort of want every lesson to be perfectly as I planned it. So I want all the activities to be linked. I want my lead-in to be connected to my practice. I want to spend exactly the amount of time on each activity as I planned. I want my eliciting to be clear. I want the students to really give me the answers that I expect them to give me. But when I think about my past few weeks or months of teaching, I can't think of a lesson when that would actually work. And when I think about those lessons, the parts or the things I do to try to make this lesson happen are actually practices of bad teaching. Because often I really have an urge to ignore a student's question so that it doesn't destroy my beautiful structure. Or I ignore my gut feeling that maybe they didn't quite get it from the eliciting. Maybe I should do a bit more explaining, but it would really ruin my structure. So I sort of brush things under the carpet, or at least really want to, in order to stick to my perfect structure. And I don't think you need to be suffering from OCD in order to experience this. I think that all of us have experienced it at some point a little bit. Maybe when our senior teachers came to observe us, and we want everything to go exactly according to plan.
Right, so I'd like to get started with the first thing that's nice is that even Jakub is not a robot. He's still a human being, right? Now, Jakub's talking about this perfect lesson and how everything should be, everything should be in place and at the right time and stuff. But us as teachers going into this job, we know that mistakes are a big part of the learning process and of our jobs as well, okay? Students will make mistakes and we will make mistakes, but it's our job to turn those mistakes into opportunities, okay? Now, when I mean opportunity, I mean several different things, and we'll get into those later on a bit as well. But the first one is that when a student makes a mistake, whether it's grammatical, vocabulary, whether it's not even much of a mistake, they ask you a question about some grammar or about some vocab. These things are extremely powerful, so powerful that they actually pause a lesson, or they can even take it somewhere completely different, right? And what's important to think about with these things is that when you do pause, okay, or you go somewhere else, you are essentially not just correcting some mistake. This is a teaching moment, okay? These are the most powerful moments in teaching, right?
And that's what we have in mind when we think about students' needs in our methodology. And students' needs is something that we use to plan our lessons. But mistakes are something that we can't really plan for, because we don't know what mistake that particular student is going to make at that particular moment. So let me ask you, how do you use students' mistakes in lesson planning? Anybody? Do you use it, or do you completely not?
You can test them at the beginning. You can see if they learned from their previous mistakes.
So would you plan a lesson?
Not the whole lesson, but at the beginning of the lesson, I would take the mistakes from last lesson and I would test them.
So error correction is sort of revision from the previous lesson. Yeah. What else? Any other ideas? Is there? Yeah, Sonia.
If a student makes a mistake, sometimes I ask other students to help correct or ask them, okay, what should have been said.
Okay, so then that becomes part of your sort of lesson plan as well. Mm-hmm. Is there anybody who doesn't use mistakes at all in lesson planning? All right. Nobody.
Good answer.
So we all
Good answer. Good answer.
All right, I'll give it over to David.
All right. So mistakes are a massive part of lesson planning. And during first lessons training that Jakub does, he gives a very nice example of this. So in his lesson, Jakub is teaching negotiation. Now, a big part of negotiation is using the first conditional. Okay? Now, in his example, his students keeps making that same mistake. Now, this is, he can try and correct it on the spot and see if it works out, but it's actually a really useful tool when these things happen because he can actually create a syllabus out of this mistake. All right? And Jakub's favorite word, the word syllabus, right? Sorry about that, man. Now, what's really useful is that he can actually take this mistake and he already knows as soon as it happens for the 4th time during this lesson, he already knows, because being the amazing teacher that he is, that the next 3 or 4 lessons will be about eradicating this mistake that a student is making, right? So just because a student makes a mistake in the moment doesn't mean that it's just in that particular lesson, okay? You can take a mistake and take it much further.
But there are other examples as well. I will stick with the first conditional example, and I will also talk about a student that we've all had, and if you haven't, you will in the future. And it's the kind of student who tells you that they don't want to study. They want to just talk. We all love those students at the beginning. We plan our lessons. We walk into the class. We start with a lead-in, and then 90 minutes later, we leave the room not having touched our lesson plan at all, having saved it for the next lesson because the student just produces the language. These classes are really easy at the beginning, but I had this guy for 2 or 3 years, and I became really, really bored. And I felt like that's a complete waste of my time. The guy could speak fluently, perfectly, but he also kept making exactly the same mistakes. He wasn't really learning anything. He wasn't getting anywhere. And I needed to motivate myself for that class. And error correction helped me. There is something that you might have already seen. I have these flashcards. And I have this one, for example, for third person S. It's yellow. And when a student makes a mistake in the third person S, up comes the flashcard, and I can correct them that way without interrupting the student. Now, I have this sort of football or soccer system. So 2 yellows is like 1 red. Red is he or she. It's really bad. It's embarrassing, so it's red. With some students, I played this game that after a red card or 2 yellows, they had to leave the pitch, leave the classroom, and fetch me a cup of coffee. I don't do it anymore because I got over-caffeinated, so to speak. Apart from red and yellow, I like to have one that is always a special purpose. For example, this is for my student who sticks ing where it shouldn't be. And with this student who just wanted to talk, I had a very similar thing. He would always say, if it will rain, we will go to the cinema. So the will after if. And so I created a card of will. And I planned lessons, which is really entertaining for me. I planned such lessons where it would be just a natural conversation. But in that conversation, he would be forced to answer by the first conditional sentences. And whenever he would answer, and whenever he would say, if it will, up went the card. And the goal was, which really kept me motivated, the goal was to throw the card away as useless.
All right. So also, just for the record, Jakub keeps those cards with him all the time. It's not just for this conference. Right? I've seen it happen. Now, Jakub was talking about the student who keeps making the same mistake over and over. I'm going to talk about another student that many of us have. These are advanced students, right? And the same kind of frustration comes with an advanced student. Yes, we all like to have our advanced students because usually these are conversation or speaking classes. But after a year or two, these lessons also going to give you the feelings that, okay, the student almost makes no mistakes anymore, okay? What am I really teaching this person? Yeah? And it sort of demotivates you as well. Now, it's also important to think about sort of how your students are speaking, right? Let's say your student uses the double negative, okay? Now, our advanced students, they consume all kinds of media. They listen to music, they watch movies, where this kind of mistake, or let's say language, is used all the time, right? But they're an advanced student, so did they make that mistake or let's not say the word mistake. Did they do that on purpose? Did they know that consciously? Did they do it? Or was it a mistake? Now, for me personally, it's a bit easier because I can tell if my students are translating from Czech, okay? Also, for those who don't speak Czech, you can usually tell if the student uses a very strange tone when they say the end of that sentence, or they have that really weird look that they get when they're like not so sure, okay? But still, it's interesting to think about what your advanced students actually, where their mistakes come from, right? And I'd like to give you an example. So I have an advanced student, and from the moment our lesson starts, so from my welcome email until now, before our lesson, during our lesson, after our lesson, in the elevator, when we get coffee, we've actually never uttered a word of Czech, okay? Now, what happened was the lesson was always going quite well. He's a very interesting guy. But what happened once is that his colleagues, which I'm guessing also were his friends, had to walk in the room to discuss something very quickly. And he spoke with them in a very, very formal way in Czech, which really surprised me because in English, he's a very laid-back, easygoing kind of guy. Or that's the impression I got at least, right? And in that moment, I was just like, okay, it's a bit weird, but okay. We'll all have our quirks. I know I have many. He would agree, right? And so I sort of let it go. And then, a few weeks later, his mom called him. So he asked if he can pick up. I'm like, sure, by all means. And this really struck me as a bit odd. He spoke quite formally with his mother as well. And I was like, okay, Hans is a bit of a interesting guy. And so I got to thinking, like, I wonder if he knows that he doesn't seem like this in English at all. And so I asked him a question straight up right after he finished the call with his mom, and I asked him, so Honza, when you speak in English, you don't sound the same as you do in Czech, because in Czech you're quite formal, and even with your mom, evidently. I'm like, do you think you're the same in English? And it was at this moment that he had a bit of like an English identity crisis. where he essentially realized that he's not really him when he speaks English. It's important, this goes back to what I was saying earlier, it's important to understand our students and know where they come from, know their personality, know their style, okay? And without me having that moment with him, of hearing him speak Czech, okay, I would have never known about this, right? So it's really important that you dig deeper with your students, and I'll get into that a bit later as well. Now, I'll finish with this. It's sometimes with advanced students, it's not the mistakes they make or what they say, it's what they actually don't say, which is the mistake, all right? Now, with your advanced students, they can talk for 60 minutes and maybe make 2 mistakes the entire time, all right? But are they really expressing themselves the way they want to, okay? Are they using all the formal language, like all the formal fancy words like obtain and inquire? Are they using phrasal verbs? Are they using, idioms, phrases? Are they using all these kinds of things? Okay? So it's not just what they say, it's what they don't say as well, all right? And when we identify this is where we actually meet our students' language needs.
Right. So we start with students' needs, with the question, with how you use mistakes in lesson planning, and we try to give you 2 different examples of what it means in real life. Real life. That's something I want to stick with for a while. There was a wonderful contest going on before this conference, and it was the contest about the funniest mistake you've ever heard from your students. Vitek, I'll pick on you because I really liked your one. Can you tell us what your favorite mistake was?
Of course, so it's going to be a bit difficult for non-Czech speakers.
They can learn basic vocab, it's good.
Czech, when you want to say, I don't have a lot of money, you say, mám málo peněz, which sounds similar to mám malý penis. And that's what the students said. And yeah, it was difficult to like keep my...
Did you keep it though? Did you? What did you do in that situation? You didn't correct it?
No, I have to tell him, I have to tell him because I didn't want him to say that again when it actually matters.
Yeah, talk about mistakes of meaning. And what did he do? What was his reaction after you explained it to him?
He laughed it off.
He laughed it off. This is something that's really, really important. He laughed it off. David, your mistake was also really funny.
It's not very appropriate. Essentially, my Czech people make the mistake with saying the word action instead of events, right? We have all heard that. And my students' parents, they own a hotel where they have many events there, right? So Anya, please stop. And what had happened was my student, I asked him, so how was your summer? Because the course was interrupted for the summer. And I've met their parents before, and so I asked them, oh, how were your parents? And my student, with a completely straight face, said that their parents got a lot of action from tourists that summer. And then I sort of froze a bit for a quick second. I thought about what I'm gonna do, and I was like, okay, Richard, that's wonderful. Let's just take that and deconstruct it a bit. So what you just said is, first of all, let's look at the word action. So it should be what? He said events, but yes, good. Now, have you ever heard the phrase to get a lot of action? And he's like, no. I'm like, okay. So essentially what that means is that you are very successful sexually, essentially. So what you just told me was, and he sort of thought about it for 2 seconds, and he connected it out. He's like, oh, no. And it's unfortunate for him because he has like 3 other people in his class. So they all started laughing a lot. But you want to talk about?
And that's sort of my point. This is something that's really nice to know about our job. We had 2 of the most embarrassing mistakes you can possibly imagine. Somebody walking around saying that he has a small penis, somebody walking around saying that their parents have, lots of action. But the result, at the end of the day, was laughter.
Yeah, and laughter is absolutely a wonderful, wonderful thing. Now, regardless of how bad the mistake is, you can see that it's quite nice to have our job compared to like a neuroscientist or something where if someone makes a mistake there, it's far different. When someone makes a mistake in our lessons, it's usually people just laugh it off, right? Now, laughter is a wonderful thing, and even though that the student made this mistake, again, this goes back to what we're saying, mistakes are an opportunity. It doesn't always have to be an opportunity to teach. It can be an opportunity to learn about your students, all right? By learning about our students, we know more. We will end up knowing more about them, which helps us plan our lessons in the future. We end up knowing what they like and they don't like. We end up knowing what their views on certain things, right? And even when it does end in laughter, which is a great thing, what sometimes happens to me, and I'm sure it's happened to many of you, and if it hasn't yet, I promise you it will, all right? Someone makes a mistake like that, let's say. That reminds another student of a joke. That joke turns into a completely different discussion in that lesson that had nothing to do with what you planned for, right? Is this a bad thing? We say it is not. It's a wonderful thing, okay? These moments create a stronger bond between you and the student, right? And a stronger bond means that there's a much better chance that they will enjoy their lessons even more, okay? Now, I say this during training as well. All of us, we see our students once, twice, sometimes even 3 times a week. This is more often than they see their best friends. It's more often than they see their parents. it absolutely makes sense to have a very good relationship with your students.
But not all students can laugh at their mistakes. Probably most of us have experienced students who apologize for their mistakes. I'm sorry, I made a mistake. Now, only once did I have a student who actually had a violent reaction to mistakes. Whenever he would make a mistake, or whenever he would be corrected by me, he would sort of bang on the table really hard and just start throwing a fit. The problem was that there were glasses on the table. It was this sort of big conference room, and they were always ready for a meeting, so they had these glasses put together, and whenever he would do his hammering motion, the glasses would start clinging. And I was really scared, and he was actually too, that they would break one day. And eventually, in the course, he would start the classes by walking in, approaching the glasses, putting them a bit more apart from one another. And my reaction was similar to yours. I just laughed. I thought it was hilarious. And he could laugh at him as well. But now I really regret that I didn't take his reaction more as an opportunity to see how he would react to different ways of correcting and what his reactions would have been, and sort of use this moment as an opportunity to experiment.
And so we here at this conference and all the trainings that we do as teachers, right, we can only take away really so much from that, okay? These kinds of moments are where you really sort of start to learn about yourself, okay? Now, when you, as experienced teachers, all right, we actually don't get that many opportunities anymore for this kind of, to treat these, to get more. And with what we can get though is like in our lessons, our students give us feedback every single day. For new teachers, they get feedback, let's say 6 times a year? 4, at least 4, right? If it goes well, right? If it goes well. Now, but experienced teachers, we only get it maybe twice, okay? And it's sort of these sort of moments in the lesson where your student has a reaction to something, okay? Or they react to the way you teach something. Any of these things can be a learning opportunity for you, okay? So use it.
Right. Students give us feedback all the time, every day, every minute. And that's why it's really important to learn to observe them and adapt. They can save us from something called the Einstein effect, which Shimon was talking about at the last conference here. Because we see their reaction and the way they react to our instructions, explanations, activities that we bring actually make us question whether the way we've given those instructions, explanations, activities is the most efficient way to do it.
All right, yeah. Now, let's say we've planned some lovely sort of lead-in, we had the pre-teaching, and we thought we did a really great job. And we sort of have this explanation of some grammar nailed down. I'm sure this has happened to many of you as well. Our students find the one example that does not fit your explanation. All right? Everyone has happened to you? Yes? Happens quite often, right? I don't know how they do it. I think they're all in on it together. I don't know how, but they do. Now, this, however, is, you need to look at it in a sort of different way. Why is it that the student used that particular example? Okay, why did that come up? Is it because of the explanation you gave? So then, again, it goes back to feedback. I need to think about how I explain that particular word or grammar. All right?
So mistakes, the topic of this conference, are of course one of those things that we need to observe very carefully, because they reflect on our teaching, and it's not always in a direct way. The fact that a student makes a lot of mistakes does not mean that we suck as teachers. Very often it might be that they are just encouraged to use more advanced structures, and of course they don't get them 100% right, but we increase their confidence in the language. And vice versa, what David was saying earlier, when a student doesn't make any mistakes, it doesn't mean that we are doing a good job. It might be just that they stick with what they're comfortable with.
Right? And so, sort of tie it all together. So, mistakes. They will happen whether you like it or not, right? How we react to them, that is up to us, right? Now, with, it's a funny thing with these mistakes. So, our students will make them, and how do we react to these things? Usually we error correct, right? And that is the one, that's our instinct. We need to do that, otherwise, students will be led astray in the language, let's say. But what Jakub and I spoke about is only a little bit of what you can do, right? And there's no better time and place than today, right here, right now, for you to find more of those. And on that note, we want to leave you, okay, to do just that and explore and learn a lot more. So thank you very much for your attention. Enjoy the conference.